The smell came first. Not the hunger, not the coffins, not the ships carrying Ireland away. The smell of our rotting beneath the soil. My husband reached into the earth and lifted what should have fed our children through the winter. It was black, soft, collapsing in his hand. That half-acre was all we had. When the field died, our food died with it. Before the famine was over, we would eat our cow, lose our home, bury my husband, and cross the Atlantic on a ship where the living slept beside the dying. But that morning, standing in the rain, I knew only one thing: the field was gone. And the field was my children. My name is Nóra. I was 31 years old, a farmer's wife, not a farmer, a farmer's wife. In Ireland in 1845, the distinction matters. The farm was not mine. The land was not mine. The house was not mine. The cow was not mine. Nothing was mine except the children and the labor and the particular, exhausting, unending work of keeping a family alive on a strip of land that was barely wide enough to grow enough potatoes to feed 5 mouths from September to June. 5 mouths. Mine, my husband Parik's, and the children. Kathleen, who was 12 and already had her father's hands, large and square and capable. Liam, who was 8 and who talked to the birds the way other boys talked to dogs, in a language that was half Irish and half nonsense, and entirely understood by the crows who gathered on our wall every morning. And Breed, little Breed, who was 4, who had not yet learned that the world was a place where fields could turn black and the turning could take everything. Breed did not know yet. Breed thought the world was the cottage and the hearth and the potato patch and the lane and the hill and the sky over the hill and the rain that came from the sky, which was every day because this was the west of Ireland, and in the west of Ireland the rain is not weather. The rain is architecture. The rain is the structure inside which the life is lived. We lived in the rain, in a cottage, stone walls, thatch roof, 1 room. The room was the kitchen and the bedroom and the parlor and the nursery and the church and the hospital and the everything. 1 room for 5 people and a cow. The cow slept at one end. We slept at the other. Between us, the fire that never went out. The fire that was lit by Parik's grandmother and passed to his mother and passed to us the way a prayer is passed, hand to hand, breath to breath. The flame that is the family and the family that is the flame. The fire never went out, until it did. But that is later. First, the field. I need to tell you about the field, about what the field meant, about the mathematics of the field, because the mathematics is the reason, and the reason is the death, and the death is the story. We had half an acre. Half an acre of land. Rented. From a landlord we had never met, who lived in London, who had never seen the field, who had never seen the cottage, who had never seen the cow, who had never seen the children, who had never smelled the rain. A man who owned 3,000 acres in the west of Ireland and who collected the rent through an agent who came twice a year on a horse and who counted the coins the way a priest counts sins, carefully, with an expression that was not unkind but was not kind either, the expression of a man performing a function. The agent came. We paid. The agent left. And the field remained, half an acre. And on that half acre we grew potatoes. Only potatoes, nothing else. Not wheat, not oats, not barley. Not turnips, potatoes. Because potatoes were the only crop that could produce enough food on half an acre to feed 5 people for 9 months. The mathematics. 1 acre of potatoes could feed a family of 6. Half an acre could almost feed a family of 5. Almost. If the yield was good. If the rain was right. If the blight did not come. We ate potatoes for breakfast. We ate potatoes for dinner. We ate potatoes for supper. We ate potatoes boiled. We ate potatoes roasted in the ashes of the fire. We ate potatoes mashed with the milk from the cow, and the mashing was the luxury, and the luxury was the buttermilk, and the buttermilk was the only thing that stood between the meal and the monotony of a life lived entirely inside a single flavor. Potatoes. The word does not carry enough weight. The word sounds ordinary. The word sounds like a vegetable. The word sounds like a thing you eat beside the meat, beside the bread, beside the other foods that make up a meal. But for us, the potato was not beside anything. The potato was the meal. The potato was the everything. The potato was the wall between us and starvation, and the wall was 1 crop thick, and the crop was in the ground, and the ground was 1/2 acre, and the 1/2 acre was rented, and the rent was paid in coins that we earned by selling the oats and the wheat that we grew on the other part of the field. The other part. Yes, we grew oats and wheat too, but the oats and the wheat were not for us. The oats and the wheat were for the landlord. The oats and the wheat were the rent. The oats and the wheat went on carts to the port and on 2 ships to England, and England ate our grain while we ate our potatoes, and the eating was the system, and the system was the empire, and the empire was the mathematics that would kill us. We grew food we could not eat. We ate food we could not sell. And when the food we ate turned black in the ground, we had nothing. That is the mathematics. That is the famine, not a failure of food, a failure of justice. There was food in Ireland during the famine. There was food leaving Ireland during the famine. Ships full of grain sailed out of Irish ports while Irish people starved on the roads beside the ports. The ships sailed past the bodies. The grain sailed over the graves. But I am ahead of myself. The blight. The blight came in September. September 1845. The month when the potatoes are lifted. The month of the harvest. The month when the work of the year is justified and the family knows whether it will eat or starve, live or die, endure or break. September is the answer. And in September 1845, the answer was no. Pádraic went to the field in the morning, the way he went every morning. With the spade over his shoulder, with the walk of a man who has walked to the same field 10,000 times and whose feet know the path the way the hands know the rosary. Without thinking, without looking. The body carrying the man to the work the way the river carries the water to the sea. He went. He came back different. I saw it in his face before I heard it in his words. The face of a man who has seen something he cannot explain. The face of a man who has opened the earth expecting gold and found ash. He stood in the doorway. The same doorway where every man in every story stands when the news is bad. The doorway that is the border between inside and outside, between the warmth and the cold, between the knowing and the not knowing. He stood in the doorway, and he said, "The potatoes are black." I did not understand. Black, black. In the ground, I lifted 3 rows, every one black, soft, rotten. Rotten, they were fine last week, I checked them myself. They are not fine now. I went to the field, I remember the walk, the lane between the hedgerows. The rain, which was not heavy, not light, the particular Irish rain that is not falling but hanging, suspended in the air like a curtain you walk through. The grass wet, the stones wet. The sky the color of a pot that has not been scrubbed. I walked to the field, and I saw. The field was the same. The ridges were the same. The earth was the same dark brown that it always was in September, turned and moist and waiting. But the plants were not the same. The leaves were spotted. Brown spots on green leaves, spreading from the edges inward, the way a bruise spreads, the way ink spreads in water. And the spots were growing. You could almost see them growing, the brown eating the green, the death eating the life, in the time it took to walk from one end of the ridge to the other. I knelt. I pushed my hands into the soil, and I pulled. And what came up was not a potato. What came up was a shape that had once been a potato and was now something else. Something soft, something dark. Something that collapsed in my hand the way a thing collapses when the structure inside it has failed. The skin broke. The flesh inside was black. Not brown, not gray, black. The black of something that is not rotting from the outside in, but from the inside out. The black of a thing that has been consumed by something invisible, something that lives in the air or the water or the soil, something that has eaten the potato from within and left only the skin to hold the shape of what it used to be. I held it, and the smell came up from my hands. The sweet, rotting, poisonous, unforgettable smell of a potato that has become death. And I knew, not everything, not the ships, not the coffins, not the workhouses, not the 1,000,000 dead and the 1,000,000 gone. I did not know the numbers. I did not know the future. I did not know that this was the beginning of the end of Ireland as Ireland had known itself. But I knew that the field was gone, and the field was the food, and the food was the children. And the children were everything. I knelt in the field, in the rain, with the black in my hands. And I looked at Pádraig. Pádraig looked at me. And between us, the question that every parent asks in every famine, in every war, in every catastrophe, in every story where the ground opens and the certainty falls in. What do we do now? The answer in that field, in that rain, in that September was silence. Because we did not know. We did not know what to do. We knew how to plant. We knew how to lift. We knew how to store. We knew how to cook. We knew every skill that a life of potatoes requires. We knew the ridges and the soil and the seeds and the rain and the timing and the prayer. We knew everything about the potato, except how to live without it. The winter came. The winter came the way winter always comes in the west of Ireland, with the wind off the Atlantic and the rain turning to sleet and the sleet turning to something that is not quite snow but is not quite rain either. The particular Irish cold that does not freeze you but soaks you, that enters through the wool and the skin and the muscle and settles in the bone and stays. The winter came, and the food did not. The potatoes were gone. The half-acre that had been our wall against starvation was a field of black rot, and the rot had been dug out and the stalks had been burned, and the field was empty, and the empty was the hunger, and the hunger was the winter, and the winter was long. We had some potatoes saved. A small pit behind the cottage. A store that Pádraig had dug in August before the blight, when the world was still the world and the potatoes were still potatoes and the future was still a thing you could plan for. A small pit. Enough for 3 weeks. Maybe 4, if we were careful, if the portions were small, if the children did not grow, if the hunger did not deepen. If the arithmetic of survival could be stretched the way the poor always stretch it, 1 more day, 1 more meal, 1 more potato cut in half and then in quarters, and then in eighths, until the pieces are so small they are not food but the memory of food, and the memory is all that stands between the body and the collapse. We were careful. We rationed. Pádraig ate less so the children could eat more. I ate less so Pádraig could keep his strength for the work. Kathleen ate less so Liam could have a full portion. And Liam ate less so Breed could have 1 more bite, 1 more sliver, 1 more fragment of potato that was too small to satisfy but just large enough to keep the body from surrendering. We ate less. And then we ate less than less. And then we ate nothing. The pit was empty by November. November. Still 4 months until the earliest spring planting. 4 months of winter. 4 months of cold and rain and the particular Irish darkness that begins at 3:30 in the afternoon and does not lift until 8:30 in the morning. The darkness that is not night but is also not day. The darkness that swallows the hours the way the blight swallowed the potatoes. 4 months, and nothing to eat. The cow. We ate the cow. I need to tell you about eating the cow because the cow is not just a cow. The cow is the milk. The cow is the butter. The cow is the income. The cow is the rent. The cow is the thing that stands between the family and the landlord, the family and the eviction, the family and the road. Eating the cow is eating the future. Eating the cow is the decision of a family that has decided the present is more important than the future, because the future requires being alive, and being alive requires eating, and eating requires the cow, and the cow is standing in the cottage, chewing, warm, alive, and the children are lying by the fire, quiet, cold, almost not alive. We ate the cow. Pádraig killed her. In the morning. Behind the cottage, with the knife he used for cutting turf. I heard the sound, but I did not watch. I could not watch. Because the cow had a name, the cow was Bonoak. The cow had been in the cottage since before Kathleen was born. The cow was family the way the fire was family, present, warm, part of the architecture of the life. Pádraig killed Bonoak, and we ate. And the eating was not joy. The eating was grief in the shape of meat. The eating was the taste of the future being consumed so the present could survive 1 more week. 1 more week. The flesh lasted 7 days. The bones lasted 3 more. The marrow lasted 2. The hide we kept for warmth. The hooves we boiled until the water was a thin, gray, tasteless liquid that was not soup but was warm and was something, and something was more than nothing. The neighbors were dying. I need to tell you about the dying, because the dying is the famine. And the famine is not a single event, but a slow, spreading, village-wide dissolution. The way a cloth dissolves in acid, thread by thread, family by family, cottage by cottage, until the cloth is gone and the village is a collection of empty walls and quiet hearths and bodies that have stopped. The O'Malleys died first. The family at the end of the lane. 7 of them. The father went first, then the mother, then the children, oldest to youngest, in the order that starvation takes them, the largest bodies first because the largest bodies need the most and the most is not available. They died in their cottage. No one found them for 3 days. When they were found, the youngest, a girl of 2, was still alive, lying beside her dead mother, not crying, too weak to cry. Too far gone for the body to produce tears. The girl lived. Someone took her. A neighbor. Another neighbor who was also dying, but who was dying more slowly and who had, in the arithmetic of starvation, a margin. A slim margin. The margin of a family that had eaten its cow 2 weeks later than the O'Malleys and therefore had 2 more weeks of life. And in those 2 weeks, the girl could be kept alive, and the keeping was the choice, and the choice was the only human thing left in a world that had become inhuman. The ditches. I saw people in the ditches, walking to the village for relief, for the workhouse, for the soup kitchen, for anything, walking, and falling, and lying in the ditch where they fell, and not getting up. The grass stains on their mouths. I saw that. The green on the lips, the green of grass. They had been eating grass. Pulling it from the ditches, and chewing it and swallowing it because the body demands food, and the mind, delirious with hunger, cannot tell the body that grass is not food, that grass will not save you, that the chewing is a reflex, and the swallowing is a prayer, and the prayer is not being answered. Green mouths. The image that I cannot wash from my memory. The image that lives behind my eyes the way the smell lives in my nose. The green mouths of the dying in the ditches of County Mayo in the winter of 1845. Pádraic went to the public works. The government, in its wisdom, had decided that the solution to starvation was employment. Not food, employment. The starving could work. They could break stones. They could build roads, roads that went nowhere, roads that connected nothing to nothing. Roads that were designed not for travel but for the appearance of industry, so that the government could say, we are helping, we are providing work, we are not giving charity because charity would weaken the Irish character, and the Irish character must remain strong, even as the Irish body collapses. Pádraic broke stones, for 8 pence a day, 8 pence. The price of a man's labor when the man is starving and the employer is the empire, and the empire has decided that the starving should be grateful for the opportunity to break rocks. He walked 6 miles to the work site. He broke stones for 10 hours. He walked 6 miles back, 12 miles and 10 hours of labor for 8 pence. And the 8 pence bought a pound of meal. And the pound of meal, mixed with water, fed 5 people for 1 day. And the 1 day was followed by another day that required another 12 miles, and another 10 hours, and another 8 pence. The mathematics of starvation. 12 miles times 10 hours times 8 pence equals 1 day of survival. The equation that killed my husband. Pádraic lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of walking and breaking and walking, and not eating enough and sleeping too little, and the cold entering his bones, the way the blight had entered the potatoes, invisibly, irreversibly, from the inside out. The fever came. The fever. The black fever. The famine fever. The typhus that followed the hunger the way the shadow follows the body. Because starvation weakens the body and the weakened body cannot fight, and the fighting is the immune system, and the immune system requires food, and the food is in the ground, and the ground is black. The fever came for Pádraic on a Tuesday. He came home from the roadworks. He sat by the fire. He did not speak. His face was the color of a candle that has burned too long. Yellow, waxy, the skin tight over the bones, the eyes looking at something that was not in the room. He said, "Nóra, I am cold." He was sitting beside the fire, and he was cold. That is the fever, the cold that the fire cannot reach, the cold that is inside. The cold that is the body failing, System by system, the way a house fails when the foundation cracks, the walls still standing but the structure gone. I put him in the bed. I boiled water. I made a broth from nettles. I laid cloths on his forehead. I did everything that a woman does when a man is sick and the doctor is 10 miles away and the doctor costs money and the money does not exist, and the not existing is the reason the man is sick in the first place. I did everything. Everything was not enough. The fever took 7 days. 7 days. The same number of days as the cow's flesh. The same number that recurs in every story about death, the biblical number, the number of completion, the number that says the thing is done. Parik died on the 7th day. In the bed, in the cottage, in the one room, with the children in the corner watching, with the fire burning, with the rain falling, with the world outside exactly the same as the world inside, gray and wet and cold and ending. He died holding my hand, the hand that had held the spade, the hand that had broken the stones, the hand that had killed the cow and dug the pit and lifted the potatoes and built the ridges and done everything that a hand can do to keep a family alive. The hand went still, and I was alone. Alone with 3 children and an empty field and a dead cow and a dead husband and a cottage that was not mine and a rent that was due and a winter that was not over and a country that was dying around me the way the potatoes had died in the ground. From the inside out, silently, sweetly, completely. Alone. The word that the famine made. The word that the famine gave to 10,000 women in 10,000 cottages in the west of Ireland in the winter of 1845. Alone, with the children, with the hunger, with the question, what do we do now? The landlord answered the question. Not with food, not with mercy. Not with the particular Christian charity that the landlord's religion preached and the landlord's practice. With an eviction. The agent came, on the horse, with the paper. The same paper that had always come, the rent demand, the document that said, pay or leave. I could not pay. The cow was eaten. The husband was dead. The potatoes were black. The 8 pence was gone because the road works had stopped, because the government had decided that the road works were too expensive, and the expense was not justified because the Irish were dying anyway, and the dying would reduce the expense naturally. I could not pay. The agent said, "You have 1 week." 1 week. To find money that did not exist. To pay rent on land that grew nothing. To satisfy a landlord in London who did not know my name and did not know my husband was dead and did not know my children were hungry and did not care about any of these things because caring is not a function of and is not a function of caring. 1 week. I did not find the money. They came on a Thursday. The agent, 2 men, a constable. They came with crowbars. They took the thatch first. They pulled the roof off the cottage the way you pull a blanket off a bed. The thatch came away in great clumps, and the sky appeared where the ceiling had been, and the rain came in, and the fire that had burned for 3 generations, the fire that was the family, the fire that had never gone out. The fire went out. The rain killed it. The rain fell on the turf, and the turf hissed, and the hiss was the sound of the fire dying, and the dying of the fire was the dying of the home, and the dying of the home was the eviction, and the eviction was the road. They pushed the walls with the crowbars. They pushed the walls inward. The stones fell. The stones that Parik's grandfather had laid. The stones that had been the boundary between inside and outside, between shelter and weather, between family and world. The stones fell, and we stood in the lane. Kathleen holding Breed, Liam holding my hand, the 4 of us. In the rain, with nothing, no roof, no fire, no food, no cow, no husband, no wall between us and the sky, nothing except each other. And the rain. I looked back at the cottage that was not a cottage anymore, the pile of stones that had been a home. The rubble that had been a marriage and a family and a life. I looked back, and I turned away, because looking back is the luxury of the saved. And we were not saved. We were on the road, and the road does not allow looking back. The road only allows walking, forward, into the rain, into the unknown. Into whatever comes after the walls fall and the fire dies and the husband is buried and the cow is eaten and the potatoes are black and the country is dying. Into whatever comes next. I turned away. And I walked. We walked to the coast. 40 miles, 4 days, in the rain. On roads that were not roads anymore, but rivers of mud and people, the living and the dying moving in the same direction, westward, toward the sea, toward the ports, toward the ships, toward the leaving. The roads were full of families like ours. Mothers with children, widows, orphans, old men with no one left to bury them, young men with nothing left to stay for. The whole of the west of Ireland was draining toward the coast the way water drains toward the lowest point, and the lowest point was the port, and the port was the ship, and the ship was America. America. The word. I need to tell you about the word because the word is the only thing that kept us walking. The word America. The sound of it, the shape of it in the mouth. The promise inside the syllables. America, 4 syllables, 4 steps, 4 days of walking. 4 children, 3 mine and 1 inside the word. America was the 4th child, the child of hope. The child that did not exist yet, but that the word created, the way a prayer creates the thing it prays for, not in fact, but in the walking toward it. We walked toward America. On the road, we joined others. The walking made a kind of village, a moving village. A village without walls, without roofs, without fires, but with the same structure that every village has. The strong helped the weak. The mothers carried the children. The old leaned on the young. The stories were told at night, in the hedgerows, under whatever shelter the land provided, which was sometimes a wall and sometimes a ditch and sometimes nothing at all. We told stories. Because stories are the food of the walking. Stories are what you eat when there is nothing to eat. Stories are the thing that the body cannot digest but the soul requires, and the soul is the thing that keeps the feet moving when the body has decided to stop. We told stories about America, about the land, about the space. About the rooms with wooden floors and glass windows and fires that burned coal instead of turf and food that was not potatoes. That was bread and meat and fruit, and the names of foods we had never eaten and could not imagine and could only say, the way a child says the name of a country it has never visited, with the reverence of the unknown. America. The word kept us walking. We reached the port, Westport, the harbor, the ships. The masts visible above the buildings like the fingers of a hand reaching upward, pointing at the sky, pointing at the direction we were going, which was away. Away, the opposite of home. The port was chaos. Hundreds of people, thousands. Packed into the streets, the quays, the alleys between the warehouses, families sitting on bundles of clothing, children crying, men arguing with ticket agents, women nursing babies in the rain. The particular, desperate, organized chaos of a mass departure, the sound of a country emptying itself into the sea. The ticket. I had no money. The cow was eaten. The savings were spent. The husband was dead, and the dead do not earn, and the earning had stopped, and the stopping was the poverty, and the poverty was the road, and the road was the port, and the port required a ticket, and the ticket required money. But the landlord had paid, not from generosity, from calculation. The landlord had calculated that it was cheaper to put his tenants on a ship than to feed them, cheaper to export the starving than to sustain them, cheaper to empty the land than to share it. The cost of a ticket to America was less than the cost of feeding a family for a year, and the feeding would be annual, recurring, endless. But the ticket was one time. The ticket was final. The ticket was a problem solved. The landlord paid our passage on a ship called the Ashling, the dream. The Irish word for a vision, a poem, a dream of Ireland as a woman, beautiful and suffering. The ship was named for the dream. The ship was a nightmare. I need to tell you about the ship because the ship is the crossing, and the crossing is the dying, and the dying is the Atlantic, and the Atlantic is the distance between the old life and the new life, and the distance is measured not in miles but in bodies. They called them coffin ships, not the passengers. The passengers did not call them anything. The passengers called them ships. The passengers called them passage. The passengers called them hope. The newspapers called them coffin ships. Because the ships were coffins. Because the ships carried the dead the way coffins carry the dead. Because the ships were built for cargo, not for people, and the people were treated as cargo, and the cargo was stored below decks in a space that was not a cabin and not a hold but something in between. A darkness with wooden walls and no windows and no air and no light and no room. We went below. 200 people. In a space built for 40. The berths were wooden shelves, 6 feet by 2 feet, stacked 3 high. A family per shelf. 5 people on a wooden shelf 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, lying on their sides because lying on their backs was not possible. The ceiling too low, the body too wide, the space too narrow for anything except the particular, compressed, sardine intimacy of the desperate. We lay on the shelf. Kathleen and Liam at one end. Breed between me and Kathleen. The 5 of us, now 4, arranged on the wood the way the potatoes had been arranged in the pit. Carefully, efficiently, every inch accounted for. The ship sailed. I felt it. The movement. The shift from stillness to motion. The moment when the land releases the ship and the ship releases the land and the sea takes both, and the taking is the journey and the journey is 6 weeks and 6 weeks is the Atlantic. 6 weeks. I want to say this clearly because the number needs to be understood not as a number, but as a duration. 6 weeks in the dark. 6 weeks in the hold. 6 weeks with 200 people who are sick and starving and frightened and dying. 6 weeks of the ship rising and falling, rising and falling. The motion that does not stop. The rhythm that the body never adjusts to. The seasickness that is not sickness but the body's protest against a situation it was never designed for. 6 weeks. The smell below decks was worse than the field. Worse than the potatoes. Worse than the ditches. Worse than the dead in the cottages. Because the smell below decks was the smell of the living dying in a confined space. The smell of vomit and fever and unwashed bodies and the particular, sharp, ammonia smell of dysentery, which is the disease that the ships carried the way the fields carried the blight, invisibly, inevitably, from body to body, shelf to shelf, berth to berth. The water was rationed. 1 quart per person per day. 1 quart. The amount that a body needs to survive, but not to thrive. The amount that keeps the organs functioning, but does not allow the luxury of washing or cleaning or the basic human act of rinsing the hands after touching a sick child. 1 quart. And the food was meal. Ground corn. Stirred into water. Uncooked, sometimes, because the cooking facilities were on deck, and the deck was often closed because the weather was bad, and the weather in the Atlantic in March is always bad. Uncooked meal in unclean water. The fuel of the crossing. People died. I need to say this plainly. People died on the ship. Not 1 or 2, not the old or the very young people, of all ages, of all conditions. They died of fever. They died of dysentery. They died of the particular, unnamed, death that is simply the body giving up. The body deciding that the crossing is too long and the dark is too deep, and the shelf is too narrow, and the meal is too thin, and the water is too little, and the living is too hard. They died. And the dead were carried up the ladder by the sailors, and placed on the deck, and the captain said a prayer, and the body was wrapped in canvas. Not a coffin, canvas, because coffins are for the land and canvas is for the sea. And the body was tilted over the rail, and the sea took it, and the sea closed over it, and the name was written in the log. And the log was the only record, and the record was the only grave. The sea. The graveyard that has no stones. The graveyard that has no visitors. The graveyard that holds the dead not in the earth but in the water. And the water does not hold the way the earth holds. The water moves. The water disperses. The water takes the body and unmakes it and remakes it as salt and current and wave. And the wave carries the unmade body across the same Atlantic that the ship is crossing. And the body arrives in America before the ship does. But the arrival is not an arrival. The arrival is a dissolving. Liam. I need to tell you about Liam. Liam got sick on the 3rd week. The fever. The same fever that took Parik. The same yellow skin. The same hot forehead. The same eyes looking at something that is not in the room. The same cold that the fire cannot reach, except there was no fire. There was only the dark and the shelf and the ship and the sea and the motion that never stopped. Liam got sick. I held him on the shelf, in the dark, with Kathleen at one end holding Breed and me at the other holding Liam, and the space between us filled with the sound of 200 people breathing and coughing and praying and dying. I held him. I sang to him. The song. My song. The song that Parik's mother had sung to him, and that Parik had sung to the children, and that I had sung to all three of them, in the cottage, by the fire, in the life that was the life before the blight. The song about the river. The song, my song. The song that Parik's mother had sung to him, and that Parik had sung to the children, and that I had sung to all three of them in the cottage, by the fire, in the life before the blight. The song about the Bun Owen River. The river that ran past our field and into the sea and out into the Atlantic and across to America. I sang about the river because the river was the connection, the thread, the water that touched both shores, the water that was home and was also here in the ship, under the ship, around the ship. I sang, and Liam listened, and Liam's eyes closed, and Liam's breathing slowed, and Liam's body, which had been hot with fever, became cool, and the cool was not recovery. The cool was the ending. Liam died on the 23rd day. In my arms, on the shelf, in the dark, with the ship rising and falling, with the Atlantic beneath us, with America ahead of us, with Ireland behind us. Liam died, 8 years old, the boy who talked to crows, the boy whose language was half Irish and half nonsense. The boy whose nonsense was the only thing in the world that the crows understood. He died. And I carried him up the ladder, not the sailors. Me. I carried my son up the ladder and onto the deck and into the light. The light that was so bright after 3 weeks in the dark that it burned my eyes and I could not see, and I stood on the deck blind, holding my dead son, with the Atlantic in every direction and the sky above and the wind and the salt and the sound of the sea, which is the sound of everything and nothing, the sound that does not care, the sound that is indifferent to the boy in the mother's arms. The captain said a prayer. I did not hear it. The wind took the words. The wind takes everything on the Atlantic. The wind is the thief that steals the prayers and the words and the names and carries them away and drops them in the water, and the water swallows them, and the swallowing is the silence, and the silence is the grave. They wrapped him in canvas. My boy, in canvas. The boy who should have been wrapped in a blanket, in a bed, in a cottage, with the fire burning and the cow breathing and the rain on the thatch and the world the way the world was supposed to be. Canvas. They tilted the board, and Liam slid, and the sea took him. And I stood on the deck, and I did not scream, because screaming is the luxury of the unbroken, and I was broken. But the broken cannot scream because the screaming requires breath. And the breath is for the living, and the living are below, on the shelf, in the dark, Kathleen and Breed, waiting for me to come back down the ladder and lie beside them and hold them and tell them that the ship is still moving and America is still ahead and the crossing will end and the ending will be the beginning. I went back down. I lay on the shelf. I held Kathleen and Breed, and the ship moved, and the sea held Liam. And the dark held us. We arrived. Not in America, in the river before America, the St. Lawrence, the Canadian side, because the ships did not go to New York. The ships went to Grosse Ile, the quarantine island. The island where the sick were separated from the well, and the separation was the test. And the test was whether you could stand and walk and show the doctor your tongue and your eyes and the palms of your hands and be judged by a man who had 30 seconds per person, to be either living enough to enter or dying enough to remain. Grosse Ile, the island in the river. The island where 10,000 Irish people died within sight of the country they had crossed an ocean to reach. The island where the coffin ships emptied their holds and the holds were full of fever, and the fever filled the island, and the island filled the graves, and the graves filled the hillside, and the hillside became a monument, and the monument became a silence, and the silence became a forgetting, and the forgetting is the thing I am trying to undo by telling you this story. We arrived. In June. After 6 weeks. After the dark. After Liam. The ship stopped. The movement that had not stopped for 6 weeks stopped. The rising and falling, the rhythm that had become the rhythm of our bodies, the motion that we had absorbed into our bones and our sleep and our breathing, the motion stopped. And the stopping was wrong. The stopping felt wrong. The stillness felt wrong. The way the ship sat in the water, not moving, held by the anchor, waiting, the waiting felt wrong. Because we had been waiting for 6 weeks, waiting for the stopping. And now the stopping had come, and the stopping was not the arrival. The stopping was the quarantine. The stopping was another waiting. We waited, in the hold, in the dark, for 2 more days. While the inspectors came aboard and walked through the berths and looked at the bodies and counted the living and counted the dead and wrote the numbers in the log, and the log was the ledger and the ledger was the record, and the record said, 47 dead out of 212 embarked. 47, nearly 1 in 4. The ship had consumed 1/4 of its passengers the way the blight had consumed the potatoes. From the inside out, silently, sweetly, completely. We climbed the ladder. The light of the St. Lawrence in June, the light that was not Irish light, the light that was brighter, harder, cleaner, the light of a country that did not have the Irish rain, that did not have the gray lid, that did not have the permanent overcast that was the ceiling of my entire life. The light was different, and the different was America, or Canada, or the New World. Or whatever the word is for the place that is not home, but that must become home because home is gone and the gone is permanent, and the permanent is the Atlantic, and the Atlantic is the grave of the boy who talked to crows. The inspection. They lined us up on the deck, single file. One by one past the doctor. The doctor looked at our eyes. He looked at our tongues. He felt the glands of our necks. He made a judgment. The judgment took 10 seconds. The judgment was pass or stay, live or die, enter or remain. Kathleen passed. Breed passed. I passed. We were allowed to leave the island. We took a smaller boat to the mainland. We stepped onto the dock. The wood of the dock was solid under my feet, not moving, not rising and falling. Solid. I stood on the dock, and I stood on the new world. And the new world did not know my name. And the new world did not care about my field or my cottage or my cow or my husband or my son or my potatoes or my rain or my fire or my language or my songs. The new world was indifferent, and the indifference was freedom, and the freedom was terrifying. We went to Montreal, then to Boston, then to a room in a building on a street in a neighborhood that was not a neighborhood but a collection of rooms, stacked and crowded and filled with Irish people who were also not from here, and who were also carrying the Atlantic in their bones, and who were also standing on solid ground for the first time in weeks, and who were also trying to remember how to be alive in a place that had not asked them to come. The room was small, smaller than the cottage. The cottage had been one room, but it had been our room on our land, with our walls and our fire and our thatch and our sky. This room was rented. Shared, a room with 2 other families. 12 people in a space that was not a home but a pause, a holding place, a between Ireland and whatever came next. I worked. I need to tell you about the working, because the working is the surviving, and the surviving is the story. And the story is not about the famine, but about what comes after the famine, which is the living. And the living is harder than the dying because the dying ends, but the living continues, and the continuing requires effort, and the effort requires the body, and the body requires food, and the food requires money, and the money requires work. I worked. I washed clothes, other people's clothes, in a laundry. A commercial laundry. A building full of steam and soap, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has crossed an ocean, and buried a husband, and lost a son and stood in the rain while her walls were pulled down, and who now stands in the steam and washes the shirts of men who were born in the country she has arrived in, and who do not know her name, and who do not care about her story, and whose shirts are dirty, and whose dirt is her employment. I washed, and the washing was the life, and the life was the children. And the children grew. Kathleen grew the way the surviving grow, quickly, fiercely, with the particular urgency of a person who has been close to death and has decided that the closeness is the fuel and the fuel is the speed, and the speed is the distance between the old world and the new. Kathleen learned English. She learned it the way I had learned to walk the road, by doing it, by putting one word in front of another, by making mistakes that were not mistakes but attempts. And the attempting was the learning, and the learning was the becoming. She became American. Not immediately. Not easily. Not without the particular pain of becoming something you were not born to be. The pain of shedding the language the way a snake sheds its skin. The old self falling away and the new self emerging, wet, raw, blinking in the light. She shed the Irish. Not completely. Never completely. The Irish was in her vowels and in her grammar and in the way she said the word mother, which she said not in English but in Irish always, even when she spoke English for everything else. Maher, the word she kept, the one Irish word she would not let go, breed. Breed grew differently. Breed did not remember. Breed was 4 when we left and 5 when we arrived, and the years between 4 and 5 are the years when memory is formed, and the forming was interrupted by the ship and the dark and the death and the new world. Breed did not remember Ireland. Breed did not remember the cottage, did not remember the fire, did not remember the cow, did not remember the field or the rain or the lane between the hedgerows. Breed did not remember Parik. Breed did not remember Liam. Breed was American, completely, without remainder, without the accent and the grammar and the particular way of saying mother that Kathleen carried. Breed said mom. Breed said it in English. Breed said it the way every American child says it naturally, without weight, without the 1,000 years of Irish that the word maher carries. Mom. And the mom was a triumph. And the mom was a grief. Because the triumph of the child becoming American is the grief of the mother remaining Irish. Because the child's forgetting is the mother's remembering. Because the new word erases the old word, and the old word is the language, and the language is the country, and the country is the cottage, and the cottage is the fire, and the fire is the life that was lived before the blight, and the blight is the reason the word changed, and the changing is the loss. Mom, maher. The distance between those two words is the Atlantic Ocean. I never learned English well. I learned enough. Enough to buy bread. Enough to pay rent. Enough to answer the foreman at the laundry and the landlord at the door and the teacher at the school and the priest at the church. But I thought in Irish. I dreamed in Irish. I prayed in Irish. And the praying was the keeping of the language that the famine tried to kill, because the famine killed not only the people but the words. The famine killed the Irish language the way the blight killed the potatoes, from the inside out. The people who died were Irish speakers. The people who left were Irish speakers. And the people who stayed learned that Irish was the language of the starving and English was the language of the surviving. And the surviving requires English, and the requiring is the abandoning, and the abandoning is the death of the tongue. But I kept it, in the prayers, in the songs, in the whispered conversations with myself in the dark room in Boston, where I lay at night and spoke to Parik and spoke to Liam and spoke to the cottage and spoke to the fire and spoke to the cow and spoke to the field. And the speaking was in Irish, because Irish was the language of the dead, and the dead deserved to be spoken to in the language they understood. I spoke to the dead in Irish. I spoke to the living in English. And the between was the Atlantic. And the Atlantic was the life. Years passed. The years that pass in a new country. The years of the laundry and the room and the rent and the school and the church and the slow, stubborn Irish accumulation of the small things that make a life. A better room. A coat. A pair of shoes. A table. A chair. A fire. A fire in a stove, not in a hearth, an American fire. A fire that burned coal, not turf. A fire that smelled different, that warmed differently, that meant differently. But a fire. And the fire was enough. Kathleen married an Irish boy from Cork. A boy who had also crossed the Atlantic. A boy who also carried the ocean in his bones. They married in the church, and the church was not the meeting house, and the meeting house was not the church, and the confusion of the words is the confusion of the countries, and the countries are the life. Breed went to school. Breed read books. Breed learned things I did not understand and could not follow and did not need to, because the understanding was Breed's and the following was Breed's, and the needing was mine, and my need was only that she learn, that she read, that she become the thing that the famine tried to prevent, which is a woman with a future. A future, the thing the famine took, the thing America gave back, not the same future, not the future that would have been, not the future of the cottage and the field and Parik and Liam and the cow and the rain and the ridges and the potatoes and the life that was the life before. A different future, an American future, a future spoken in English, written in English, dreamed in English, but prayed in Irish. Breed came to me one evening, in the room, by the stove, the American stove, the coal fire. The fire that was not the turf fire but was a fire. She was 18. She said, "Mother, tell me about Ireland." And I opened my mouth, and the Irish came out, not the English, the Irish, the language that I had kept in my prayers and my songs and my conversations with the dead. The language that was the language of the field and the cottage and the fire and the rain. The Irish came out. And Breed said, "I do not understand, Mother, I do not speak Irish." And I stopped, and I looked at her. And I saw the thing that the famine had done, not to me, to her. The thing that the crossing had cost, not the bodies, not the hunger, not the fever. The language had not crossed. The language was in the Atlantic, with Liam, with the 47. With the canvas and the prayers and the names that the wind carried away. The language was the thing that did not survive the ship. My daughter was sitting beside me, asking me to tell her about Ireland, and I could not tell her, because the telling was in Irish, and the hearing was in English, and the distance between the telling and the hearing was the ocean. I cried. Not the crying of the famine, not the crying of the ship, not the crying of the field or the fever or the funeral. A different crying. The crying of a mother who has saved her child's body and lost her child's tongue. The crying of a woman who carried everything across the Atlantic except the one thing that holds all the other things together. The language, the basket that carries the fruit. The basket broke. The fruit survived. But the basket, I tried again. In English, my bad English. My broken, halting, wrong grammar, thick accent English. I said, "Your father was a good man." I said, "Your brother talked to the crows." I said, "There was a fire in the cottage that never went out." I said, "The rain was every day." I said, "The potatoes turned black." I said, "We ate the cow." I said, "They pulled down the walls." I said, "The ship was dark." I said, "Your brother is in the sea." I said, "I washed other people's clothes so you could go to school." I said, "I am proud of you." I said, "I am proud." I said it in English, because English was the only language my daughter understood. And the understanding was enough, not the same, not the Irish, not the language of the dead, but enough. The word that the famine could not kill, the word that the ship could not drown. The word that the new world gave back to the old woman by the stove in the room in the city and the country that was not home, but that had become home because the children were here, and the children are always the home. Enough. I say their names. Every evening, by the stove. In the room that is not the cottage. Parik, my husband, who broke stones for 8 pence. Who killed the cow so the children could eat. Who died of the fever that followed the hunger, that followed the blight, that followed the mathematics, that followed the empire. Liam, my son, who talked to crows, who died on the 23rd day. Who is in the Atlantic, whose body arrived before the ship, but whose arrival was a dissolving, and whose dissolving is the grief that I carry the way the sea carries the salt, in every drop, in every wave, in every breath. Kathleen, my eldest, who held Breed in the dark. Who learned English, who married an Irish boy from Cork, who says maher, who kept the word. Breed, my youngest, who does not remember, who says mom, who went to school, who reads books, who became the future that the famine tried to prevent. Bonoak, the cow, who was family, who was eaten. Whose eating was the grief in the shape of meat. The cottage, the stone walls, the thatch roof, the fire that never went out until it did, the field, the half-acre, the ridges, the potatoes that were sweet and then were black. Ireland, the country that I left, the country that I carry, the country that lives in my prayers and my songs and my conversations with the dead in the dark room at night. The country that my daughter cannot understand because the language did not cross the ocean. The country that I am. The country that I was. I am Nóra. I was a farmer's wife, a mother, a woman who walked 40 miles in the rain and crossed the Atlantic in the dark and washed other people's clothes so her children could live. I was a woman who carried everything except the language, and the everything without the language is the almost. And the almost is the carrying, and the carrying is the life. They built a memorial, years later, on Gross Eel, in the river, on the island where the ships emptied and the fever filled and the graves covered the hillside. They put a cross on the hill, a tall cross, a stone cross, a cross that can be seen from the river, from the ships, from the water that carried the living and holds the dead. The cross says nothing about the mathematics, nothing about the landlords, nothing about the grain that left while the people starved, nothing about the system that grew the food and shipped the food and ate the food in London while the people who grew it ate grass in the ditches of County Mayo. The cross says nothing about the mathematics, but the cross stands. And the standing is the remembering, and the remembering is enough. One more thing. Breed had a daughter. The daughter was born in Boston. The daughter was born American. The daughter spoke English, only English. The daughter never heard Irish except in the prayers her grandmother whispered at night. But the daughter was given an Irish name. Nóra, my name. Breed named her daughter Nóra. And the naming was the bridge, not the language, not the songs, not the prayers. The name crossed. The name that the famine tried to bury. The name that the ship tried to drown. The name that the Atlantic tried to dissolve. The name survived. In a girl in Boston who does not speak Irish and does not remember Ireland and does not know the smell of turf or the sound of the rain on the thatch or the taste of buttermilk with potatoes. But who carries the name? And the name is the seed. And the seed is the potato that did not turn black. And the potato that did not turn black is the hope. And the hope is the daughter. And the daughter is the future. And the future remembers. Remember us. Remember us. Remember us.